I can turn a cowboy into a god, but I'll be damned if I can make the public love his wife. This bitter confession from an MGM executive, as recorded in the Star Machine production notes, unmasks the chilling paradox hidden behind Hollywood's red carpet. In an era where every smile was a million-dollar calculation, studios meticulously sculpted gods like Clark Gable and Gary Cooper, perfect beings capable of melting millions of hearts with a single wink. Yet behind the Technicolor glow lay a reality that drove image consultants to despair. These icons often bypassed radiant starlets to marry women whom the press dubbed photographers' nightmares. From Clark Gable's wife, 17 years his senior and looking every bit the housekeeper, to Anthony Quinn's partner, whose face was famously said to be enough to curdle milk. Why did these symbols of perfection choose to anchor their lives with faces the industry deemed nature's mistakes? Join us as we reopen the files on 12 mismatched marriages that once sent shockwaves through the capital of cinema. If you want to discover the rawest hidden corners behind the glamour of legends, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming exclusive files. Clark Gable and Maria Rhea Langham, the contract to mold a god. Before becoming the king of Hollywood, with his perfectly groomed mustache and a smile that could melt the iciest hearts, Clark Gable was merely a coarse young man with oversized ears and a pitiably crooked set of teeth. Everything changed when he caught the eye of Maria Rhea Langham, a wealthy, sophisticated socialite who was 17 years Gable's senior. Many newspapers of the time and posthumous records, such as David Brett's Clark Gable Tormented Star, confirmed a harsh reality. Their 1931 marriage was not a romance, but a training contract. Rhea Langham possessed none of the beauty of a starlet. In fact, the public of that era maliciously mocked her for looking more like Gable's mother or housekeeper than a wife. However, this plain-looking woman owned what Hollywood craved more than looks, money, and high society refinement. Imagine an undercover deal. Rhea spent thousands of dollars, a fortune at the time, to tear down and rebuild Gable. She paid for dentists to fix his crooked teeth and sent him to vocal coaches to lower his coarse voice into that signature deep, seductive baritone. She taught him how to choose a pocket square, how to hold a wine glass, and how to waltz like a true gentleman. Under Rhea's molding hands, the awkward farm boy metamorphosed into one of the greatest masculine icons in cinematic history. Gable admitted in a rare moment of gratitude, "I owe her everything regarding my mannerisms." Here lies the ultimate paradox. The man who represented every young woman's dream was a product fine-tuned by a woman whom the studios always tried to hide from the official frame. While Gable shone brilliantly on screen alongside beauties like Jean Harlow or Vivian Lee, Rhea Langham quietly retreated into the shadows. MGM strategists executed a systematic campaign to erase Rhea's image. They cropped her out of group photos or cleverly arranged them so she looked like a random fan standing nearby. The studio feared that the presence of an older, plain wife would shatter the illusion of the king's dashing elegance. Yet this very contrast created a bizarre chapter in Hollywood history. Rhea didn't need public validation. She possessed the ultimate prize, Clark Gable himself. Their marriage ended in 1939, just as Gable reached the pinnacle of his career with Gone with the Wind. Once the god was complete, the training contract reached its expiration. Rhea left with a massive divorce settlement, leaving behind a perfect Clark Gable for the world to admire forever, carrying the sculpted marks of the woman Hollywood never wanted to acknowledge. But if Clark Gable accepted the trade of his freedom to be molded into a god, another hunk chose to hide behind a cold wall of social status to protect his halo. That man was Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper and Veronica "Rocky" Balfe, the steel fortress behind somber eyes. In 1933, when news broke that Gary Cooper, Hollywood's most gallant knight, was marrying Veronica Rocky Balfe studio PR departments, fell into a silent panic. They didn't know how to sell this wife's image to the public. Rocky was no radiant rose. She possessed a stern, sharp face that bordered on cold and a New York aristocratic demeanor that was rigid to the point of dryness. While Cooper was the embodiment of wild romance, Rocky was a champion sharpshooter and the heiress of a prestigious dynasty, the biography Gary Cooper. Off-camera records that Rocky's existence in Hollywood was not to beautify the frame, but to establish a moral order. The public of that time often made cruel comparisons between her bold face and the expressive eyes of starlets like Patricia Neal or Ingrid Bergman, women who truly drove Cooper wild. Look deeper into this paradox. Why would a man who could possess any beauty in the world accept being imprisoned in a marriage with a woman whose face resembled a stone statue? The answer lies in safety. Cooper was a philanderer but weak-willed when it came to the waves of passion. Rocky, conversely, was a steel fortress. She didn't hold her husband with beauty. She held him with social status and absolute composure. Insiders later noted that Rocky maintained the marriage like a religious ritual. She ignored every scandal, ensuring their home remained the symbol of a model family. Her existence was a statement to Hollywood. No matter how far Cooper strayed, he always had an official harbor to return to. Her complainness and stern face were the shields protecting his career from being destroyed by scandals. The most fascinating thing about Rocky was her total refusal to become prettier to please the public. She didn't hire stylists to soften the harsh lines of her face, nor did she try to fake a smile on the red carpet. She forced Hollywood to accept her as a figure of authority. A director who worked with Cooper once remarked, "Gary could seduce the world, but Rocky was the only one who could make him tremble with just a look." Their marriage lasted until Cooper's death in 1961. Rocky proved a paradox in the capital of illusions. A woman as practical as she was dry is sometimes the only thing that can keep a star from being consumed by his own halo. She didn't need to be the audience's dream. She only needed to be Gary Cooper's law. Leaving the cold steel fortress of the Cooper household, we enter another room where a leading man with the most seductive voice in the world is surrendering to an intellectual queen, whose appearance made photographers scramble for the shadows. James Mason. James Mason and Pamela Mason. The covenant with the Queen of Blades. If there were a poll for the voice most capable of stripping a woman's soul, James Mason would surely top the list. The British actor possessed a somber, elegant beauty and a hauntingly seductive tone, so much so that if he read a phone book, millions of hearts would melt. Yet in Hollywood, where hunks usually chose beautiful and compliant dolls, James Mason knelt at the feet of Pamela Mason, a woman whose appearance led studio executives to cry, "Is this a cruel, practical joke?" Pamela wasn't just plain by Hollywood's merciless standards. She possessed a style that destroyed every effort of image consultants. With a sharp, angular face, calculating eyes, and a fashion sense described as a library fire in a British boarding school, Pamela was a photographer's nightmare. However, according to the memoir, The Making of Alice, what made her immortal was not her face, but an intellect with the power of heavy artillery. Imagine a reverse role scenario. James Mason, the man who could have any radiant beauty, voluntarily became a servant to his wife at industry parties. Witnesses in Hollywood recorded that while James Mason quietly fetched drinks for his wife, Pamela would sit imperiously at the center, firing off razor-sharp remarks about films and the most powerful filmmakers, making studio heads turn pale with fear. This was not a marriage based on physical attraction, but an intellectual survival alliance. Pamela did not play the role of a decorative wife. She was the brain, the agent, and the hound protecting her husband's career. She wrote scripts, negotiated contracts, and was ready to rip apart anyone who dared to look down on James. Director Nicholas Ray once made a classic observation: James married the only woman who scared him more than he scared himself. She looks like she could file your taxes and dissolve your body in acid without changing expression. The most fascinating aspect of Pamela Mason was her absolute disdain for beauty standards. While other actors' wives poured fortunes into plastic surgery and stylists, Pamela deliberately emphasized her unorthodox look with severe hairstyles and an imperious attitude. She proved a paradox to Hollywood, that intellect and sharp-wittedness could wield a power far more terrifying than the most radiant beauty. Their marriage, lasting from 1941 to 1964, didn't end due to fading looks, but in a thunderous divorce where Pamela's litigation skills reportedly reduced the most seasoned attorneys to tears. Pamela Mason left a costly lesson for the film capital. When a handsome man meets a woman who is terrifyingly intelligent, he will gladly trade every beauty standard for a commander-in-chief of his life. Leaving the intellectual queen, Pamela, behind, we transition to an equally strange tale where another seductive giant decided to trade his career for a power ladder named Catherine DeMille. Anthony Quinn and Catherine DeMille, the latter with the face of punishment. Every rule of aesthetic symmetry in Hollywood seemed to collapse in 1937, when Anthony Quinn, a Mexican-born youth of wild, rugged, and vibrant beauty, led Catherine DeMille down the aisle. Catherine possessed none of the softness or charm of a stage rose. She had a stern face, razor-sharp features, and a gaze that gossip columnists of the time described as sharp enough to curdle milk. The truth behind this choice didn't lie in a racing heart, but in the bride's surname DeMille. Catherine was the adopted daughter of Cecil B. DeMille, the most powerful deity in Hollywood at the time. A young actor struggling to escape stereotypical roles like Quinn needed a passport into high society, and Catherine was exactly that. Despite vicious press remarks that Catherine's face could stop a charging rhino at 50 paces, Quinn accepted the union. Posthumous records describe this as the nakedest power grab in cinematic history. One set observer bitterly remarked, "He could have married any long-legged girl, but he chose to marry a dynasty." Look at the tragedy hidden behind the red carpet photos, a young Anthony Quinn in the prime of his life standing next to a woman who looked more like a disciplinary school teacher than a young bride. But for Quinn, Catherine's plainness was a worthy price for the endorsement of his legendary father-in-law. The most bitter angle was Quinn's blatant infidelity. While Catherine spent her life maintaining a model family image with 5 children, Quinn sought physical compensation in the arms of glamorous mistresses. He used his wife's name to sign million-dollar contracts, but used the embrace of other women to satisfy his ego. A Hollywood insider later recorded a cruel quip from a confidential magazine editor: "Quinn wants the DeMille name on his business card, but he wants pin-up faces in his bed." This paradox endured for 28 years until Quinn achieved the status of an international superstar and no longer required the protection of Cecil B. DeMille's shadow. The 1965 divorce took place the moment Catherine's utility value expired, confirming a cold, hard truth in Hollywood's brutal ecosystem. Beauty is sometimes sacrificed on the altar of ambition, and men are willing to live with ugliness as long as it grants them ultimate power. Catherine DeMille departed, leaving behind a chapter in history about a woman who used her sternness to shield the world's most ambitious man, only to be discarded once that ladder had carried him to the summit. Leaving behind Anthony Quinn's calculated power grab, we move toward a completely different story, one where plainness was not a ladder, but a final salvation for a soul exhausted after a lifetime of dazzling romances. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney and Jan Chamberlain. The pit stop for a wasted legend. In 1978, Hollywood witnessed an event that made entertainment editors rub their eyes in disbelief. Mickey Rooney, the actor, with perhaps the most legendary romantic history, announced his 8th marriage to Jan Chamberlain. The shock didn't stem from the number 8, but from the bride's appearance. Jan Chamberlain possessed neither the long legs of a starlet nor the face of a goddess. She had an appearance that tabloids of the time maliciously described as resembling a woman who would ask to speak to the manager at a suburban supermarket. To understand this paradox, one must look at the beauty graph of Rooney's life. His first wife was Ava Gardner, the woman dubbed the world's most beautiful animal. From that peak, Rooney's subsequent wives grew increasingly plain, as his life was ravaged by debt and alcoholism. When Jan Chamberlain appeared, the National Enquirer did not hesitate to run a ruthless headline: "The Reverse Evolution of Mickey Rooney from Goddess to Mail Carrier." However, behind the aesthetic gap that no studio makeup could rescue lay a verified truth. Rooney was by then bankrupt both financially and spiritually. According to documents published in his biography, Life is Too Short, Jan was no trophy wife. She was a soul nurse. While previous beauties abandoned Rooney the moment his halo dimmed, Jan was the only one willing to walk with him in cheap clothes and dine at ordinary diners. The most fascinating perspective here is Rooney's rebellion against his own past. He seemed exhausted by the role of the beauty's husband. With Jan, Rooney was allowed to be ugly, old, and a failure. An MGM executive bitterly remarked after seeing the pair at an event, "If you arranged Mickey's wives in chronological order, you'd have the world's most depressing chart. But if you look at his smile, you'll see Jan is the only one who didn't view him as a lottery ticket." This marriage lasted 34 years, an unprecedented record in Rooney's life. Despite later legal disputes over assets, Jan Chamberlain's presence by Mickey Rooney's side served as a slap in the face to Hollywood's beauty standards. After all the pursuit of vanity, the last thing a god needed was a woman ordinary enough to make him feel like something other than a defective display piece. Humphrey Bogart and Mayo method. Hell with the face of a gargoyle. Hollywood insiders in the 1940s used to whisper, "If you want to see a real action movie, don't go to the theater. Go to the Garden of Allah Hotel to watch Humphrey Bogart and his wife brawl." Before he found Lauren Bacall, Bogart was trapped in a marriage with Mayo Methot, a woman industry insiders secretly nicknamed the Gargoyle. Mayo didn't just have a coarse, round face and eyes permanently bloodshot with rage. She possessed a soul strangled by addiction. This wasn't mere gossip. According to the book Bogart, A Life in Hollywood, during one apocalyptic storm at their estate, Mayo stabbed Bogart with a butcher knife. The legendary actor ended up in the ER with a long scar on his back, and like a B-movie script, he told doctors he had cut himself shaving. Warner Brothers worked overtime to prevent photographers from capturing Mayo's pugnacious visage. Whenever forced to appear with her husband, Mayo was often pushed into the shadows or instructed to turn her back to the camera. Why did a masculine icon, a man who could stand toe-to-toe with on-screen crime bosses, tolerate years of abuse from a woman considered physically unmarketable? The answer lies in a specific quirk of Bogart's psyche at the time he felt inferior. Before becoming a superstar, Bogart believed he was merely a second-rate actor with a weathered face, and Mayo was all he felt he deserved. Behind-the-scenes secrets reveal that studio executives were so repulsed by Mayo that they concocted absurd excuses to strike her name from major premiere guest lists. They feared her appearance would tarnish the tough guy image they were painstakingly building for Bogart. This marriage wasn't love. It was an open scar on Hollywood, proof that even the strongest men can be imprisoned by the mediocrity and cruelty of a flawed beauty. When Bogart finally escaped Mayo for Lauren Bacall, a true beauty, all of Hollywood breathed a sigh of relief. An MGM-PR chief even sent a congratulatory telegram to Warner Brothers, reading, "Congratulations on upgrading Bogart's situation from a horror show to a fairy tale. We can finally photograph him from the neck up again. We have just walked through marriages defined by self-destruction and compensation. But across the ocean in the dimly lit theaters of Europe, another couple was preparing a shock for Hollywood's definition of intellectual beauty, a union between two entities known as the monster and the creator, Peter Lorre and Celia Lovsky. Peter Lorre and Celia Lovsky when the monster found his creator. In the flickering shadows of Vienna's theaters before the Nazi wave, a man with hauntingly bulging eyes and a chilling voice like Peter Lorre found the deity of his life. It wasn't a muse with snow-white skin, but Celia Lovsky, an Austrian actress significantly older than Lorre, possessing a face that contemporary critics described as sharp as a hatchet that had witnessed a murder. The truth of this relationship lay in an intense intellectual covenant. Celia was the one who discovered Lorre's talent, teaching him how to use his eccentric appearance to dominate the screen. According to German and Hollywood film archives, Celia was not just a wife. She was the teacher, the brain behind the serial killer character in the masterpiece, M. When Lorre brought this woman of masculine style and severe features to the film capital, the studios were aghast. A Warner Brothers photographer once exclaimed, "They look like two entities stepped out of a failed science experiment rather than a cinematic couple." The most fascinating angle here is Celia's role as protector. While Hollywood saw only a plain woman, Peter Lorre saw life itself. According to the biography The Lost One, A Life of Peter Lorre, Celia was the only one capable of curbing Lorre's heavy drug addiction. She negotiated contracts, managed finances, and directly confronted studio bosses to protect her husband's interests. A director once remarked, "She looks sharp enough to scare a gargoyle off a cathedral, but without her, Peter would have been dead or destitute years ago." Celia proved that in a place as superficial as Hollywood, a sharp intellect can sometimes wield more power than 1,000 feet of Technicolor film. Celia's disciplined salvation helped Peter Lorre survive his darkest years. But in another corner of Hollywood, another Oscar winner found happiness in a common way that left the media stunned: Ernest Borgnine. Ernest Borgnine and Donna Rancourt. The harmony of two potatoes. In 1955, when Ernest Borgnine won the Oscar for Marty, a role as a bumbling butcher, always insecure about his ugly looks, the world believed it was a triumph of talent over appearance. Yet Borgnine's real life was even more shocking than the movies. After a series of brief marriages to scorching but toxic beauties, he chose Donna Rancourt as his final harbor. Donna wasn't just plain. She seemed to be at war with every glamorous standard of the film capital, sporting the look of a rural housewife with a mismatched sense of fashion. Donna's appearance alongside Borgnine at red carpet events triggered a wave of ruthless mockery from the media. One notorious gossip column wrote, "Good God, did he find her at a bus station in Duluth? I've seen school lunch ladies more glamorous than this." But the verified truth was that Borgnine was exhausted from being a display animal for beauties. After his 32-day marriage to legend Ethel Merman imploded, he craved a woman who didn't make him feel like he needed plastic surgery just to be worthy of standing next to her. The hallmark of this 40-year marriage was the studio's total surrender in trying to tweak Donna's image. While other studios deployed armies of stylists to turn plain wives into socialites, MGM executives simply shrugged. They felt Borgnine's own rugged looks combined with Donna's ordinariness created a bizarre logic. An MGM manager once noted, "They are perfect together. It's like watching two potatoes fall in love." This couple proved a paradox where artificiality is the air people breathe, daring to look raw is the most enduring bond. The simple happiness of the Borgnine potatoes is a rare happy ending. But Hollywood history records an even stranger alliance, where ugliness was elevated to an art form to hide the deepest secrets: Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester, the fortress of the Bride of Frankenstein. The hallways of 1930s Hollywood mansions often echoed with the peculiar laughter of a couple the press called the royalty of misfits, Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. Laughton, with bulging eyes and a doughy face like a storybook, Quasimodo had married Elsa, the woman the world remembers for her electrified hair and skeletal frame as the ghost-like figure in The Bride of Frankenstein. The truth of this marriage, revealed by Elsa in her memoir published after Laughton's death, was a brilliant, functional play. Laughton was gay, a secret that could destroy any leading man's career at the time. Elsa, with her innate eccentricity and a look unsuitable for any romantic lead, agreed to be his shield. Hollywood looked at them and saw only two ugly, quirky artists, but in reality, it was a mutual defense alliance against a studio system that preyed on different breeds. Instead of hiding their plainness, the studio's PR department chose a genius strategy. They turned their quirkiness into an artistic brand. They didn't try to make Elsa beautiful, they made her an icon of sophisticated eccentricity. A publicity expert admitted, "We couldn't make them beautiful, so we made them interesting." Most remarkably, they stayed together from 1929 until Laughton's death in 1962. Elsa famously uttered a line that shattered every marriage standard. "Charles and I had a perfect marriage. We didn't have sex, but we didn't have arguments either." It was an understanding that transcended the flesh that allowed Laughton and Lanchester to survive the storm. But not every star used marriage to find a soulmate. In another dark corner, a leading man with the face of a bulldog chose a quiet wife simply to serve as a backdrop for his tyranny. Wallace Beery. Wallace Beery and Rita Gilman. When the bulldog needed a mirror for tyranny. Hollywood history remembers Wallace Beery as a living paradox. The man who played bumbling, lovable grumps on screen was a monster of legendary cruelty in real life. With a face that the press likened to a bulldog that had lost a fight with a shovel, Beery should have sought a beauty to soften his image. Instead, in 1924, he stunned everyone by marrying Rita Gilman, a woman gossip columnists described as bland as a slice of unbuttered toast. Rita Gilman brought no beauty, no family status, and no artistic ambition. She appeared by Beery's side like a librarian lost on a chaotic movie set. Verified facts from MGM's production archives and the accounts of makeup artists reveal that this marriage was a veiled hell. Rita was not a wife. She was a target for Beery to vent his own physical insecurities. In their 1939 divorce filings, Gilman accused Beery of extreme mental cruelty. She testified that he frequently forced her to stand before a mirror while he belittled her ordinary appearance, maliciously comparing her to the glamorous starlets he worked with at the studio. The true darkness lay in Beery's sick calculation. An MGM makeup artist later revealed Wallace liked Rita because she had no capacity for resistance. He needed a woman plain enough to make him feel superior. Beery turned his wife's ordinariness into a tool of power. When Rita attempted to beautify herself or wear fashionable dresses, Beery would mock her until she burst into tears and retreated into her gray-drab clothes. This 15-year marriage ended in absolute coldness. Beery even intentionally announced the divorce on the very day they officially adopted a son, aiming to extinguish any positive publicity or public sympathy Rita might receive. She left behind a heartbreaking testament that in the world of brilliant stars, silence and simplicity are often just prey for the brutality of decayed souls. Beery's cruelty pushed Rita into the shadows, but in another corner of Hollywood, one couple used their rough exteriors to declare war on the entire system of superficial aesthetics, George C. Scott and Colleen Dewhurst. George C. Scott and Colleen Dewhurst. The alliance of granite slabs. George C. Scott was famous for a look he described as a clenched fist. With a broken nose, fiery eyes, and a threatening aura, he was one of the world's most powerhouse actors. When Scott married and remarried Colleen Dewhurst, Hollywood witnessed a literal geological collision between two entities who knew nothing of standard beauty. Colleen was not the type of woman for men to coddle. She possessed what theater critics called magnificent ugliness. They married in 1960, divorced in 1965, remarried in 1967, and divorced again in 1972. Records show this was no ordinary romance, but a union of two artists who held every aesthetic standard of the American dream in contempt. Colleen Dewhurst was tall with a rugged face, high cheekbones, and a voice as gravelly as stones grinding together. A newspaper of the time described them in the most honest terms. Together they look like they were blasted out of a granite block with mining explosives. They have the sex appeal of a highway collision, but enough talent to crush the rest of Hollywood combined. Instead of trying to fit in, Scott and Dewhurst chose public rebellion. They appeared at high society galas without a trace of makeup or luxury gowns. The most fascinating aspect of this pair was their self-awareness of their outsider status. Colleen Dewhurst proudly declared after their second divorce, "George and I had a great deal in common. We loved acting, we loved being together, and we both hated pretty people." This was a direct strike against the studio system, which was obsessed with pouty lips and flawless skin. For them, plainness was a badge of honor, proof that raw talent could stand on its own without the crutches of vanity. They chose each other to spit on Hollywood's tedious molds, creating a legend of love based on the shared pain of those who don't belong to the majority. The explosion of the granite couple shook the stage, but in a quiet, calculated corner of MGM, another wife was being systematically ghosted to protect one of the most righteous icons in history, Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy and Louise Treadwell. The ghost wife behind a fake legend. The decades-long legend of the romance between Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn is often hailed as Hollywood's greatest love story. But for that story to sparkle, MGM's PR machine had to perform a ruthless task, the total erasure of Louise Treadwell Tracy's legal wife. Louise lacked the aristocratic beauty of Hepburn. She was a simple, stern woman who was partially deaf, a condition studio bosses viewed as a stain if placed next to a masculine icon of moral integrity. Married since 1923, Louise had been by Tracy's side since he was a starving stage actor struggling for a meal. When Tracy became an A-list MGM star, Louise suddenly became a secret not to be mentioned. Studio archives show the PR department worked tirelessly to ensure her name rarely appeared in print. Photos of them together were either brutally cropped or sealed in vaults. One studio staffer recorded that when Louise appeared quietly at her husband's funeral in 1967, many guests who were Tracy's own colleagues didn't even know who she was. The ultimate paradox here is that Louise's sacrifice and her unglamorous appearance were the very tools that protected Tracy's career. Because Tracy never divorced Louise due to Catholic faith and maintaining his image as a responsible man, the public adored him even more. Meanwhile, Louise spent her life building educational centers for deaf children, a noble task that had no place in the glossy pages of fan magazines. The studio sold the audience Spencer Tracy as a concept of integrity and morality, and that concept did not allow for a deaf aging wife to appear and muddy the romantic narrative with Katharine Hepburn. Louise Treadwell was the final victim of the brutal beauty economy, a woman punished for her ordinariness, forced to live as a ghost to make room for the glittering illusions the crowd craved to believe in. 12 marriages. 12 raw paradoxes have unmasked the cruel truth behind the golden age of Hollywood. Beauty is sometimes just a pawn on the chessboard of ambition and power. These men, desired by the entire world, chose to bind themselves to non-standard women, not because they were blind, but because they understood a vital truth. In an industry built on illusions, authenticity, intellect, or a solid family foundation were the only things that could save them from the ruthless cycle of obsolescence. Hollywood can mold gods, but it was these invisible wives who kept those gods from falling into the abyss of emptiness. What do you think about these counter-current choices made by Hollywood legends? Does true love exist behind these power contracts? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us as we unseal the next secret files of the world's film capital. See you next time.